Danielle, and welcome to this enchanted house. Today we are talking Lucy Maud Montgomery novels, but not Anne of Green Gables. First off, a disclaimer, I love Anne of Green Gables. I have read, all the Anne books. I think there's, 9 or 10 of them. I've read all of them. The ones about her children, the ones where it's, a collection of short stories, and her family's just kind of there as side characters. So, I love Anne of Green Gables, don't get me wrong. But she's actually not my favorite LM Montgomery book. There's ones I like more, and I thought I would talk about them today and share them with you. If you like Anne of Green Gables, these are some other books of hers that you might like. Just really quickly, if you don't know who LM Montgomery is, that's Lucy Maud Montgomery. She is a Canadian author who wrote at the end of the 19th, beginning of the 20th century, essentially from around 1890 to into the 1930s, 1940s. Her most famous book is Anne of Green Gables and the sequels to that book, but she was a very prolific author. She's written 20 novels, over 500 short stories, over 500 poems, and a slew of essays, and I've read a lot of them. I would say I've read all of them. I know I've read all the novels. I have read a lot of the short stories, a lot. Familiar from a lot of her poems, and I've read a couple of her essays also. So, yeah, she wrote a lot. And actually, a lot of the books I like kind of come a little later in her career. And they tend to be a little more mature, more adult than some of her earlier works. So, just a disclaimer before we go ahead. Like I said, she is writing at the end of the 19th, beginning of the 20th century. And so you will find things that are dated and kind of problematic that maybe were at the time, that maybe were even considered progressive at the time, in particular some of her depictions of minorities and such. But that's going to be true for anything that you find that's old literature. Just for the time, she was a progressive person, but that doesn't necessarily translate into what we would consider progressive today. But she does have very strong female characters. I will say there are a lot of disabled characters in her stories who are characters that go beyond their disability, which I think is great, but that's not something I feel like I can comment on, and I would love to hear other people's commentary on that in her books. So your mileage may vary about how well you can read these, how much that takes you out of the story, how much it upsets you. And I just wanted to put that in advance. That's true for when we get into anything older literature-wise. Also, one more warning, I will get a little spoilery. If you want to read these totally, I'll put a list down below if you just want to know what the books are and go read them. These are kind of my thoughts on them. So let's get into it. My number 5 book, I guess, is, and I'm going to lump a couple books together here because they're technically a series, just like I kind of lump Anne and all in together. I'm also going to lump in Emily all together, and her book is Emily of New Moon, Emily Climbs, and Emily's Quest. Those are the 3 books surrounding Emily. So she wrote actually a couple of different series with different, basically orphan girls who go on and their lives after they grow up. Emily, there's Anne, of course, there's Emily, and there's Pat. Emily's my favorite. She just kind of falls right into sort of, I don't know, I relate to her more, I guess. Like Anne, she's an orphan, but she goes to live with relatives that she's never met. Her mother elopes and then passes away, and then her father passes away, and her mother's family is the only ones that are there to take her in, and they're kind of the mom was a bit of that her elopement was seen as a disgrace, and so they kind of distanced themselves from her, so she's never met these people, but they are technically her family, and they become her family, much in the same way that the Cuthberts become Anne's family. So I like Emily because she's a little more mystical. She's often described as being elfin. She's a little darker in some aspects. She definitely wants to be a writer. She knows from a very young age that's what she wants to do, and how she pursues that goal. There's some romance, of course, and some adventures. It's very similar to Anne. it's like if you liked Anne of Green Gables, you will like Emily and the sequel books as well. So nice starting point. Next up I'm not sure if it counts as a novel or novella. It's called Kilmeny of the Orchard. This is a little bit of a different book. First of all, it's from the male character is the protagonist. It's from his point of view. He's a wealthy. He's kind of like a dreamboat guy. Like he's very nice. He's very kind. He's also like the son of a millionaire who owns like a chain of stores. But he's just finished college, and his friend has a teaching position, but he can't. He's ill and he has to leave it. So his friend asks the main character Eric Marshall if he can go to Prince Edward Island because I should have mentioned that earlier, but Prince Edward Island is like the main setting for almost all her stories and almost all her books. She really has a romance with it, and she keeps going back there. So of course he's going to Prince Edward Island. And he goes and he takes over the school. He's like, oh, I'm just going to do this for a couple months. I'm going to kind of just chill until because eventually I'm going to have to go work for my dad and take over the business over there. But, this is a little break before I do that. And while he's there, he meets Kilmeny, who is mute, and she cannot talk. And she plays the violin, and she plays it beautifully, and that's how she expresses herself, or she writes down. And it's the story of him romancing her and trying to convince her that she's, because she figures because she's mute that she's not a suitable bride for him. And it's a very charming love story. There are some problematic elements to it. A little bit casual racism. While it's great that Kilmeny is mute. She does get cured at the end, which is kind of, I would say, it's really nice to see a disabled protagonist, because she's as much a protagonist as Eric is. But yeah, she does get cured at the end. Sorry, spoilers. But it's a very sweet story. It's very lovingly told. So the next book is actually a compilation of short stories. It's called Among the Shadows. It was edited by Rhea Wilmhurst. And it's sort of the darker side of LM Montgomery. There's some ghost stories, which she's really good at. They're very enchanting ghost stories, I would say. They're not like horror, they're more like spooky ghosts, often with a message for loved ones beyond the grave. There are some stories about people who've fallen on hard times. Some stories that don't have happy endings, because usually most of her works have a happy ending or like a resolution you can feel good about. Some of these end kind of tragically. There's her take on Gothic. Her short story version of a Gothic story, which is delightful. And there's also some more kind of humorous stories, but maybe, whether involving temperance and someone getting drunk or these two old sailor types who live by the sea. They're more humorous, but it's all kind of the darker, kind of not the bright, cheery that she's come to be associated with. And it's one of my favorite compilations. There's actually a lot of compilations of her short stories out there, but Among the Shadows is one of my favorites. So my second pick also involves short stories, and I'll get to that in a second. It is called A Tangled Web, and is one of two adult novels. Like most of her novels involve young children, and in the series they often grow up we follow them as they grow up to be women and they get more adult towards the end. But she wrote two books that are more geared towards adults, and A Tangled Web is one of them. It is the story of these two clans living once again on Prince Edward Island. And the matriarch dies, and there's this brown jug, which is like a family heirloom, and it's like was brought over by their ancestors and is considered like the most valuable piece. And everyone's wondering who's going to get it, and she throws a monkey wrench. She says, "Well, I'm going to wait. You're all going to have to wait a year because I'm going to mess with you." And it's all these intertwined stories of all these different people in this clan of families and their romances and how they work out. And how they interact with each other, all because this brown jug, they're waiting to find out who inherits it. And that I will not spoil for you if you want to find. But the reason I bring up short stories with this one, there's actually a couple of her short stories are kind of interwoven into this tangled web of all these families. In particular, there's two that are actually also from Among the Shadows that if you read one, you will recognize the other right away. So you can spoil it yourself if you want. So lastly, there is only my favorite LM Montgomery novel, but one of my favorite novels of all time. And we'll get into why maybe, but it is called The Blue Castle. First of all, it is one of her few stories that does not take place in Prince Edward Island. It takes place in mainland Canada. It is not about a young orphan girl at all. Valancy is considered an old maid at the time of this novel, though she's like, I think 27, 28. By today's standards, she's young, but by the standards of the day, she's considered on the shelf. Not that she was ever out, because she has this overbearing mother who kind of suppresses anything joyful that she would experience. There's a cousin who's actually about the same age, but she's so beautiful, and she's had like several engagements and none of them have quite worked out. And she's the darling of the family. And Valancy, who's the main character, is always off to the side. It's Valancy Sterling. And she's just sort of mousy, quiet, very little joy in her life. And then she comes to believe that she is only maybe has a short time to live, that she has a heart condition that could kill her at any moment. And she starts to realize, hey, I can start living my life. And it's about this transformation she undergoes where she starts standing up for herself and doing the things she likes and the things she wants to do. And eventually she goes and takes care of her childhood friend who is ailing, who also happens to be the daughter of the town drunk, and had a child out of wedlock, and the child died. It was very tragic. But, back in those times, that was considered shameful. And she goes and takes care of this woman, and her family's all shocked. And then she also, through the progress, meets Barney Snaith, who is this recluse who everyone says is, he must be the town gossip is, he's a murderer, he's a criminal, he's up to no good. And and it's about how they kind of come together, and they actually, because this is like I said, there's a little bit of spoilers here. So after her friend passes away, the family's like, oh well, we can spin this. She was being a charitable person. She took care of this young girl who, before all this happened, was a good Christian girl, and she was an act of charity. Now she can come home. We can find her maybe a nice husband. And she goes off and marries Barney, and it's as a friendship thing. She says, hey, I don't want to go back with my family. If I marry you, I can go off and enjoy life. And he's like, yeah, well, if we're going to be married, we're going to be married. You have to come live with me in my cabin out in the woods. So I didn't mention this before, but the Blue Castle Valancy has this great imagination, and when she's living in this sort of dowdy, depressing life, she always escapes to her Blue Castle, which is this fantasy castle where she's this princess and wears beautiful dresses, and there's all sorts of princes, and she has all sorts of romances, and there's all sorts of fun and gaiety. And so she goes to this cabin in the woods, and the cabin becomes her real life Blue Castle, and she explores nature, and she kind of lives how she wants to live. And I won't spoil how this one ends, because I love how this one ends. I will give you the hint that it is a little kind of ridiculous, but it's so great that it's ridiculous that, the reason I love this is, first of all, I love Valance's imagination. I can relate to having a Blue Castle. I think having a Blue Castle is, normal. I think having this fantasy world you can escape to that's kind of just your dream world, especially when things are going bad. Like, I think during this past year of COVID, if you had a Blue Castle, if you had a fantasy world you escaped to, good for you. And I love the idea that, in a way, she can make it real for herself. But yeah, so Blue Castle is, like I said, one of my favorite novels of all time. It is definitely a comfort read for me. It's one of those ones I go back to. It's a very happy story, but it's dealing with things that are kind of, being depressed and being in a place you don't want to be and trying to find your way out of it. So, and yeah, Valancy is one of my favorite characters. She's someone I've always kind of related to. If you've played games with me online, a lot of times I will use Valancy as my character name or my gaming name. So those are 5 LM Montgomery novels that aren't Anne of Green Gables. And like I said, love Anne, but she's a great author, and I encourage you to read some of her other works. I would love to hear what your favorite LM Montgomery books are. How would you rank them? Have you read some of these? What are your thoughts on these books? So comment below, let me know. I'd love to hear from you guys. If you like this video, I have lots of other videos I'd love you to check out. And if you like my videos, please subscribe, and you can catch up with the latest and the greatest. I'd love to connect with you guys on social media. I have links to my Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter below, and would love to talk to you guys there. There's a link for my Patreon as well. I hope you guys have an enchanted day, and I will see you guys next time. Bye!